Okay, I think we are ready to get started today. Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Mara Walsh, and I'm your host today. I'm excited to be hosting this virtual tour today. Before we get started on our virtual tour presentation, I just have a few housekeeping items that have to be put out there. Please know that you are on Zoom webinar. This is a Zoom webinar interface, so your video and your microphone are not activated. You will not be seen or heard, but we do want to hear from you. So there are two ways to connect with us on the Zoom platform. You can chat. The chats usually go to me. And the questions usually go to the guide, and the question will address the guide. The questions will be addressed by the guide after the presentation. So there's two ways to do that on Zoom, and then when you're on Facebook, obviously you can use the feed to put any of your comments in. If you're having audio or visual issues, you could leave a note in the chat. I actually forgot to say, where are you joining us from? So you can do that now in the chat, and I will get a good idea of where everybody's calling in from today. As you probably know, I am located in the United States, specifically between Philadelphia and New York, which is in the Eastern time zone. So right now for me, it is 5 p.m. and you can judge your time depending on that, just so you make sure you know when our tours are and that you put them on your calendar properly. I know that's a sticking point with some people. As you may know by now, when we're not hosting virtual tours, I am traveling with my groups in real time. My tours are mainly adult-only tours during the year, and then in the summer, we have trips that are multi-generational, from teens through senior citizens. If you want to follow our travels, our Facebook group is called Girl Travel Tours. You can ask to join. Just say Mara led me to this page, and we'd be happy to add you to the group. I have a trip going off next week. We're going back to Cuba. So if you're interested in joining us, please join the group and follow along. And then next year, we have a host of wonderful, great tours that we'll be doing. So you can see where we're off to next year as well. And as some of you know, this whole virtual tours through Zoom started during COVID, and has been going on since then. We used to do them weekly during COVID, and now we try to put them in whenever we can, and we're not traveling physically, but we've done more than 80 some virtual tours. The recordings are all available on my website, which is girltraveltours.com. So please go back and enjoy them, and also on YouTube and on Facebook, so you can find all of the recordings. We have just one more virtual tour on the calendar for 2023, which is in December on the 19th, I believe. And then we will start to program out 2024 to put some virtual tours on there. So let's get started with our tour that we have today. We have a wonderful tour guide with us who is rejoining us here, and her name is Anna, and her expertise is from her home country, which is Russia. She's a licensed tour guide there, but due to the Russian-Ukrainian war, and her zero tolerance for it, she has left Russia to guide in other places. I will leave her story to her. She will tell it better than I can. But she's been in a couple different places since she has left Russia. So she will catch us up on that when I hand the microphone over to her. But today, Anna will share with us her knowledge of Jews in Russia. And I will share with you through the chat and the Q&A how you can leave a tip for the tour guide. And hopefully you will love the presentation, and you'll know how to tip the guide. And also you'll get an email tomorrow which will also have links to tip. So you'll have plenty of ways to get back to that for her if you don't want to leave the Zoom call right now. So Anna, if you're ready, come on over and you can steal the controls from me and share your screen and start your presentation for tonight. Welcome, and it's always nice to see you again. So why don't you catch us up on what you've been doing and also share your presentation for us.
Hi, Mara. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And the geography is fantastic. There are people from all over. So, good evening, good afternoon. My local time is 11 p.m. And yeah, just I think it's easier just to let me explain about the geography here. So yes, indeed. I am from St. Petersburg, and this is the city that just has my heart forever. So I left a bit of my heart in St. Petersburg. Because of the war, I moved to Israel together with my husband, and I've lived in Israel for a year and a half. And because of the recent war, and it's not over yet, it's just a temporary ceasefire. We are in Amsterdam, and we've been here since mid-October. And the plan is to stay here for a little longer, just a little longer. But I'm not really wasting my time here because I've been researching on the history of the Jewish diaspora in Amsterdam, the history of Nazi occupation, history of Anne Frank, and I'm already doing some in-person tours, and I'll be doing also virtual tours. So if Mara is interested and if you're interested, I'd be more than happy to share with you this knowledge as well. So basically, I found a lot of connections, both were like, let's say Jewish side of things, both Russia, uh, the Netherlands, and of course Israel, and how this works together. And I've always been interested in the history of Jewish diaspora in my country because it's hi everyone, because it's really it explains a lot, I would say, the turbulences that the Russian Empire did go through in the 20th century. So when I say the Russian Empire, I refer to the country, the way it looked up until the revolution of October 1917. And by this, I mean, if I say Russia, I regard to the Russian Empire, which included also territories of Belarus, territories of Ukraine, and it's important when with regards to like a Jewish question. And this tour, well, it's going to be a combination of the pre-recorded footage. I'll be taking you to the beautiful choral synagogue of St. Petersburg. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for all the kind words and sympathies. Thank you so much. And of course, I added a lot more photographs and footage just to provide you not only to take you virtually to the synagogue, but also to provide you the history of the Jewish diaspora in the Russian Empire and its connection, even with the foundation of the State of Israel. And it also the turbulences that affected the Jewish diaspora, they had direct impact on the history of the entire country. Basically, this is my challenge for today. There is never really enough time to talk about this, so I'd better just get down to to the video. Oh, it's interesting, Evelyn. So you spent 2 days in Russia, in St. Petersburg. I believe it was it must have been a cruise trip, you know. Okay, so I would like to start sharing my screen. There you go. So some photographs are of a very bad quality because I couldn't find the better ones. I mean, some images, but the video was recorded for me by my friend, my videographer last year. I think it was maybe it was even this year. So it's a very fresh video. But some images like this one is of a pretty bad quality. So I've already done couple of tours about St. Petersburg, so some of you might be familiar with the story. But just in a nutshell, St. Petersburg is a very young city. It was established in 1703 by Peter the Great. And St. Petersburg has, from the very beginning, has been a very different city in terms of its population. Because Peter the Great, that's not him, right? This is someone else. But Peter the Great's idea was to make the city very different, to make it a European city, to make it an international city, one of the European capitals. And to build the city, not in a Russian way, Peter hired many people, many specialists from all walks of life, from all over. And he really couldn't care less about their religion. He couldn't care less about their background. He needed specialists. He needed people to work. That's why it's not really surprising to know that many people who worked for Peter the Great were actually Jews, and they helped him build the city from scratch in the middle of nowhere, and at the 59th parallel north, making St. Petersburg the northernmost megapolis. Uh, so, and obviously, for example, Antonio de Vieira is one of those people. Actually, he was a Portuguese Jew, but when it gets to Portuguese Jews, it's important to understand that after the Great Spanish Inquisition, the Jewish population in Spain and Portugal either had to convert to Christianity or leave. So Antonio de Vieira, the person who was the right hand of Peter the Great and did in fact a lot for establishing the city, was the converted Jew. There is a very, I would say, very not really derogatory, but pretty humiliating word "vykrist" in the Russian language, but actually means a converted Jew. But it basically, it not only it shows that this person parted with with their religion, but also is not really sincerely converted to another one. So it's like the person that doesn't really belong to any religion, and so these people were called like this. But again, Peter the Great couldn't care less about that. And as I said, he had several Jews who worked for him. For example, Peter Shafirov, also a Vikrist, so a converted Jew, converted to Christianity, of course. His last name was Shapiro, a very common Jewish name. And basically, when Peter was away, and Peter was away so much time, Shafirov was in charge of the city. He was in charge of many things. He was in charge of legislation. He was in charge of law and order. He was in charge of money. So Peter knew that the Jews were very good with money, so he trusted them, and he built a very multinational, multi-religious, team of people who worked for him, and it proved to be very effective. But obviously, it's I don't mean to say that in Russia life was a bed of roses for Jews. And when I say Russia, I actually mean in general the history up until yesterday, I would say. But we need to go back to late 18th century to the times when Catherine the Great ruled the country. Um, in her, well, during her term for more than 40 years, there were three partitions of Poland, and Poland was the country with historically with the biggest Jewish population. And when part of Poland became part of the Russian Empire got the biggest Jewish population. That's basically how it was. But Catherine the Great didn't want to deal with Jews, didn't want them to become part of the country, part of the population. So she designed the infamous pales of settlement, as designated areas, geographical areas where Jewish population was allowed to live, and she imposed many regulations on what Jews were allowed to do, what they were not allowed to do. And of course, well, in St. Petersburg, they had a lot of restrictions. They were not allowed to live in the city. Most Jews were allowed, well, those who were allowed to work, they would come to work and leave. But as usual, when there are rules and, well, there are also loopholes. And Abraham Peretz, It should be actually spelled Peretz with a TZ, Peretz. He was one of the richest people in the country and in St. Petersburg because he supplied salt. And salt, of course, was extremely important as a for conserving stuff. And it was basically as expensive as just the money. It's just the money was. And obviously, he was Jewish and everybody knew about it. And yes, he was allowed to live in the city. He was allowed to do whatever he wanted. And of course, Abraham Peretz, well, knew how to pull strings and how to, well, establish some connections. And he did a lot for Jewish communities. And thanks to Abraham Peretz, and then later on in the 18th century, there would be more um, well, here and there it would become more relaxed for Jews. Here and there will be some regulations lifted off, but in general, throughout the first half of the 19th century, it's it wasn't very easy. Thanks to Abraham Peretz, for example, Jews were allowed to serve in the army, but things changed in the middle of the 19th century with Nicholas the First. Nicholas the First, don't confuse him with Nicholas the Second, um, imposed many regulations. And the question is, were the Jews trusted? Were they allowed to serve in the army? How would people feel serving next to not next to Jews? Um, so not everybody was happy about it. And I'd like to, actually, this is not very, it's a very common fact, but most of the Romanovs, most of the Russian emperors, including Nicholas the First and Nicholas the Second, were actually anti-Semite. Like it's just, it's known for a fact. And we know of a lot of anti-Jewish laws and regulations in their term. But Alexander II, that was quite different emperor. Alexander II ruled in the from 1855 to 1881. He did a lot of good things in the country. He abolished serfdom, for example, so slavery. He freed the Russian peasants, and he also with this given freedom to the people, he also started a new social class, and many of those freed people were Jews also, and people started coming to big cities, started building small businesses, and this is how the class of merchants was established. And he gave a lot of freedom to Jews, so he more people were allowed to stay in the city, in St. Petersburg and Moscow. More people were allowed to settle around the cities, around the big cities as well. And again, the Jews could serve in the army again, and they could study at universities on almost equal terms. So things were looking much, much better. However, when Alexander II died, he died from hands of terrorists. One of the terrorists who killed him was a Jew. And the next emperor, his son, Alexander III, I know there are too many Alexanders, he started tightening the screws, not only just for people in Russia, but also for Jews. And it gave uh, non-Jews a reason to persecute Jews. And this is when a thing called Sofot Banegev, basically a riot in the desert, a storm in the desert started. Pogroms in Russia started. Uh, because all of a sudden Jews were no longer trusted. They were considered dangerous for the monarchy, dangerous for the country. And this event, just the assassination in the heart of St. Petersburg, with a group of people, and only one of them was a Jew, it gave start to, well, it ignited pogroms, uh, rivers of blood in the southern areas of the Russian Empire, Ukraine, Moldova and area Kishinev, areas around it. That's why it's called storm in the desert, because these are the southern areas. And those pogroms made actually Jewish population start seeking for better life. This is how many Jews migrated to the States. It was still allowed up until the Great Depression started in the States. And then this also gave rise to Zionism, and many Ukrainian Jews, Russian Jews would actually go to Palestine to establish the Jewish state there. So you see, this is how all of this is connected, interconnected, all these interesting things. But we go back to St. Petersburg. And we are now in around 1870s, and we're looking at the map. This is the map of Jewish praying homes, not really synagogues. There were 13 of them altogether by the end of the 19th century. And well, numbers differ, but somewhat around 6, maybe 7,000 Jews live in St. Petersburg. This is not really much when there's like 100,000 people that lived at around the same time in the city. However, it was enough for a person called Horace Gunzburg to finally get a permission to build a synagogue. So he got the permission in 1870s, and Ginsburg wasn't the only rich and very famous and influential Jew. There was also Samuel Polikov and several more Jews that within really couple of decades became one of the richest people in the country because they were involved in the railroad construction, in the Trans-Siberian Railroad construction. And so, of course, they had no restrictions imposed on them. They were investing in the railroad construction. They opened banks. They provided loans for other people, for other business people in the country, for the new merchants class that emerged just before that. And well, with money like this, with influence like that, of course, they were given permission finally to build a synagogue, and that's what it was supposed to look like. Um, it would take about 20, well, a bit less than 20 more years actually for the plan to be implemented, for the synagogue to be constructed. It was supposed to be, well, St. Petersburg was the capital of the Russian Empire, so it was supposed to be the big, grand synagogue, and it was supposed to be very big. Obviously, the land was given far from the downtown, and the original plan was turned down. And the way the synagogue looks now, it's only half of the size of the original size. Don't worry, this is not the way the way it looks nowadays. This photo was taken about 15 years ago, and at that time the synagogue, of course, in a pretty bad condition. Nobody uh, restored it. It was fully functioning synagogue, but it looked pretty badly. And only some 10 years ago they restored it, and it's definitely, well, to my liking, one of the most beautiful buildings in the city. Um, the synagogue, which is quite symbolic, was opened on Hanukkah Day, and well, Hanukkah is around the corner, and um, I just hope there will be a much more festive vibe of Hanukkah than it is now. So I hope the situation in Israel improves, and for all the Jewish people as well. Um, and this is the opening ceremony. So and you, of course, you can see all the very important people wearing very expensive costumes, wearing a lot of, well, some jewelry. It was a very special ceremony because very special people were behind it, and that's the way the synagogue looks now. Um, when preparing this tour, like I was assuming that there would, well, like even nowadays we have people from all over, from all the backgrounds. Some of you might be Jewish, some of you might not be aware of what actually Judaism and synagogue is about. So I would like to, like, provide, I would say, the general information about what actually a synagogue is. and what we're going to see in the synagogue. But also, I'll continue with the story of the history of Jewish diaspora, basically in the 20th century. From because I've just kind of provided you a very quick recap on what happened before that. So now, finally, at the turn of the 20th century, we have a synagogue, and you see the huge community. This is the burial ceremony. We're not even sure who died, but you can see there was, of course, a very big community. And just a moment. Oh, yeah, that's actually better. Um, so first of all, let's take a look at the building. Uh, it is big, but as I said, originally it was supposed to be twice as big, and it has very interesting architecture. Uh, Sometimes, actually, when you look at synagogue, it's really hard to say, "Oh, that's a synagogue," because when you see a church, well, you can definitely say, "Oh, that's a church," or you see a mosque, "Oh, definitely you see a minaret, you see a crescent, oh yeah, that's a mosque." With synagogues, it's a little bit different. There are actually no particular rules on how a synagogue building should look like from the outside. There are rules, of course, as to what is inside and how it's arranged, but well, it could look in very different ways. And the architect who was given the project opted for the most trendy architectural style at that time, and it was the Moorish style. So many people like were thinking like, why are you building a synagogue in a Moorish style? And then the question also because most of the Jews that lived in St. Petersburg were actually Ashkenazi Jews, so Eastern European Jews, but the Moorish style would probably be more suitable for Sephardic Jews or for Mizrahi Jews. So Sephardic Jews, those are the Jews that originally lived in Sfarad in Spain. So Sfarad means Spain in Hebrew. Or the Mizrahi Jews, Mizrach means east. Well, actually, these are the Jews that lived in Africa and in the Levant and the Middle East. So, but that's what the architect chose. This is what Ginsburg was okay with. And now we have this building. But there is some symbolism because you might notice that from there are these parts over here, they jut a little bit. They actually, it looks like Torah scrolls. These are the beams keeping the Torah scrolls. So yeah, there is some symbol. Synagogue uh, is a bit different when it gets to, well, yes, when you get into a church or a mosque, there are so many rules, and like these are like really holy places. But when it gets to synagogue is not exactly a holy place. There is one holy place for Jews. This is the temple, right, in Jerusalem that was destroyed. But a synagogue basically means Beit Knesset. This is the house of gathering. And synagogues traditionally would be seen as places together as a community, praying, yes, again, but this is not really the holy place, and it's not a problem to go inside a synagogue. Of course, it depends on also on the safety regulations, especially nowadays. But in general, when there are no services held, and there are 3 days of the week when the services are held in synagogues, when it's not Shabbat, it's open and it serves as a museum. So basically, my videographer was able to film everything, to visit most of the places in terms of a tour. So you will see some people in the synagogue, but those they didn't come to pray. So he just visited it as a museum, for educational purposes. Well, welcome to the main room, to the main hall of the synagogue, and well, you see it's freshly restored. You see how much space there is, how many windows, how much air. Well, that's definitely a very expensive building, and of course, it was the first synagogue. There were synagogues in Moscow, but it was the first one in St. Petersburg, and it was the capital. So the idea was to make sure it would house thousands of people, and yes, it can house up to 5,000 people. That's what they say. And you see there are seats here, and it does look a little bit like a church. Um, but the thing is that many synagogues, Ashkenazi synagogues, so Ashkenazi Jews, those who lived in Europe, especially Eastern Europe, so they would speak unintentionally or intentionally, they would pick something from the European civilization where they lived in. That's why Ashkenazi synagogues mostly have arrangements of seats the way they would be in churches, in Catholic churches, whereas Sephardic Jews would mostly have kind of a U-shaped layout of the seats. And you see, there are two floors. It's called Grand Choral Synagogue. So there are definitely places for the choir, but they are now above us as we're standing, so they are above us. But the second floor is something that not every synagogue could afford to have, but well, this synagogue was supposed to have two floors. The second floor would always be given to women. It's sort of a women's section called Ezrat Nashim in Hebrew. And obviously, men and women are separated in the synagogue, so nothing can distract a person from connecting with God, through the prayer. In the center of the synagogue, now you see these people, they're only preparing for the prayer. They're covering their heads with a talit, special sort of a piece of cloth used, for praying, and they cover their heads so they're not distracted. They would also put phylacteries on their heads, special boxes with leather straps that contain some pieces of parchment with the prayers, and they're praying now. So, but this is not really a ceremony. They came, they pray. The place in the center is called Bima, a sort of elevation from where Torah is read. As I said, 3 days a week. And you see over there on top, so this is where the choir would be. Actually, the synagogue is quite unusual because it also has an organ. Not every synagogue has organ, and also not every synagogue could afford it. But of course, with the money like that, with rich sponsors like that, this synagogue had it all. And what we see in the hut, well, it's might be called altar in the church, but well, it's Aron Kodesh. This is the sacred place in a synagogue, always facing Jerusalem. If it's in Galut, if it's outside of Jerusalem, so of course, so every Aron Kodesh will be facing Jerusalem. If you are in Jerusalem, it should face. If it's in Israel, it should face Jerusalem. If it's in Jerusalem, it should face the Temple Mount. That's how it works. So we always know where Jerusalem is. And in Aron Kodesh, well, Torah scrolls are kept. They are protected. They're covered with a special piece of cloth called parochet. And so this is like the Holy of Holies in the synagogue. And well, there are not too many photographs of the synagogue in the 20th century for a number of reasons. So let me now go to some history and then we'll continue also our exploration. So this is a photo taken somewhere in the 1920s, and this is a very rare photograph because when the revolution happened, of course, the newly born country, the Soviet Union, would become an atheistic state, and then every kind of religion would be actually prohibited. And this is why there are not too many photographs of religious life in the in the Soviet Union because it was not encouraged and it would be prohibited further on. But what happened in this very short period of time, let's say starting from 1900, and I'll continue the video, but I'll continue also with the story of those days. So what happened between 1900 and 1917, so just before the revolution. So you remember the pogroms. So many Jews had to leave, but some Jews stayed. And those Jews, after being oppressed, persecuted, and attacked, so they would actually become the powerhouse of the revolution because they needed to withstand the Tsarist regime that was clinging, to every last resort possible just to survive. But of course, the power was really running through the fingers of Nicholas II, well, the revolution took place, and the Jews, together with, well, no, the revolution happened. There were two revolutions, but like in February and October. I'm not going into details, but behind all those revolutions, there were a lot of Jews. Those Jews who were members of the proletariat, of the working class, and those Jews basically that were disgusted by the, well, by the monarchy, and they were oppressed by the monarchy for so many years that they wanted to push back. So actually, the Jews became um, the powerhouse of the revolution. So they finally managed to pay back. And what we're looking at now, I specifically paused here. So these are the seats. They're numbered, they're named seats in the synagogue. And we see here well, I assume some of you might speak some Russian, but it's not necessary. So it actually says Polikov. So Polikov is the last name of one of the very, well, one of the biggest donors for the construction of the synagogue. And the donors would have their named seats. And the orthography is pre-revolutionary. So these nameplates have been here since the construction of the synagogue. But unfortunately, all those rich Jews, merchants, big manufacturers, they lost everything also. Many of them had to flee. Many of them managed to transfer their capitals before the revolution, but some of the Jews actually did sponsor the revolution. And of course, the Jewish society split, but those Jews who stayed in the country, especially those who were close to Lenin, who were close to the new power, so they would become, uh, they would sort of, be the kings of the world at that time. That's why many partners of Lenin, many of his associates would originally actually be Jews, but they would had to hide it. Even Leon Trotsky himself, he was Jewish. Many people around Lenin were Jewish. But after Lenin died, and Stalin came to power, Stalin's idea was that everybody who helped Lenin, he would come after them, because Lenin would have never really appointed Stalin. Lenin never really agreed with Stalin, and Stalin was afraid. Uh, he couldn't trust those who would be trusted by Lenin. And under Stalin, Jews would be severely persecuted. And there would be several big scandals also around the Jews. So many Jews would end up in the camps. And of course, there would be just many regulations imposed on them. They would not be prohibited. They would not be living in the pale settlements anymore. Basically, pale settlements no longer really existed like, administratively. Geographically, yes, but not really administratively. Um, but there were many restrictions. Uh, that's why there are not really many photographs. And here we are in the special room. This is a wedding hall. You see here a chuppah, like a tent. Basically, it's not necessary to get married in a synagogue. Basically, you could marry even in the desert. That's what actually historically Jews would do. But there should be a sort of a tent. Once there is a tent, you can go get married. You don't need to be at the synagogue. And we have this very rare photograph. This taken in the 1950s. Um, this wedding ceremony was actually in the synagogue, and this photo is very rare. So people who did that, well, in the 50s, it was a little bit easier when it got to religion, because it was already after the Second World War, and Stalin, uh, well, lost a bit of a grip after the war, because pretty much undermined his health. It undermined even his reputation in a way. Um, so that's why it would be a little bit easier. It would also, throughout the Second World War time, and at that time, Leningrad, which is Soviet name of St. Petersburg, which would be under occupation, would be under the siege for 872 days. And of course, people needed to hope. People needed hope, and that's why some churches would be operating throughout the war, and the synagogue as well. So there would be some services held, and after the war, yeah, so the life was sort of coming back to the synagogue, and now the place is also used for the wedding ceremonies, of course. Here we have some traditional Ashkenazi wedding costumes. Of course, the dress looks very, there is a word in Hebrew, tzionit, modest. Um, but, you know, as I say, nowadays, of course, there are traditions, they are kept, but it's not necessary to get married in the synagogue unless you want, you wanted to do it in an Orthodox way, and this is when you can have the wedding hall at your disposal. I really like the way it's been restored, the beautiful the stained glass is original, by the way, and I think the room looks perfect, and it looks very much like one of the halls, the Moorish rooms in the Hermitage. So it reminds me a little bit of the Hermitage itself. Um, so what would happen, let's say, in the second half of the 20th century? Oh, well, after the establishing of the Jewish state, of course, many Jews wanted to leave the Soviet Union because they were looking for more freedom, and they were looking for some, well, less harsh conditions, for life, because, well, even like my husband is Jewish, and his mom tried to well, to apply, for education, at the university, but in the state university they said, sorry, we don't have places for Jews anymore, so there are no quotas for Jews. That's why she had to choose another educational facility. So things were not very easy. So many regulations remained, and little by little, starting from the well, closer to the 80s and 90s, well, some immigration would be allowed, but people had to waive their Russian citizenship. People had to pay huge sums of money, and many people did. And they left, and they would leave so that they were thinking they would never be coming back. And this is how things would be up until the perestroika. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, but of course it started dilapidating before that. So it didn't happen just within one day out of nowhere. So obviously it, things would be much easier, and many would leave exactly in the times of the perestroika. The situation in the country was not easy. Uh, People were poor. Uh, it was no really understanding of what kind of legislation to apply, because it was just the newly born country again. So within just 1 century, the country changed its face, its name 3 times. So we are now outside, and as we go, I'm sure you can see this, and some of you might recognize this is the photo. This is the photo of the Western Wall, of the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. And you've seen how big the main building is, and it took so long to build it, so about 20 years altogether, that some people just couldn't wait this long. And alongside with the construction of the main synagogue, they built a small one. And this is where we're heading. This is a very special building, and um, normally it's not really allowed for visits. That's why my videographer had to join a group to visit the building. And uh, well, when it gets to synagogue, it's not just well, as I say, it's the house of gathering, and there would normally always be some other rooms, for community. For example, this small synagogue building, it worked as a synagogue while they waited for the big building to be open. But nowadays, it's also used as a Beit Midrash. A Beit Midrash, basically, it's like a shul, a school. So they use it to study Torah. And this building doesn't look as impressive as the main building, but from the inside, it's very special. And judging by the decorations, you can say that the synagogue had the very, very, very rich donors and still has. So many people would ask me, like nowadays, so is there any anti-Semitism in Russia? And some 3 or 4 years ago, I would have said that, well, not really. And compared to what it used to be, compared to what was in the 19th century and in the Soviet times, no, I actually don't remember. Well, up until 2022 at least, while I was still in Russia and I left in March 2022, um, I never really heard from my husband that he had encountered any anti-Semitism at that time. But with the how things happened after the Black Shabbat, after the 7th of October, when this recent war in Israel started, well, I actually don't know what to think anymore. And it's so political, it's so politicized, and I'm not sure what the aftermath is. Um, so clearly, this Putin's regime has brought the worst in people. Does this mean that people have never really stopped being anti-Semites, or they have always been the same and nothing really changed since the Soviet Union times? It's a philosophical question. I'm not sure I can actually provide any answer to that. But what I can say is just about this building. Take a look at the colors. Take a look at the decoration. So this is the Moorish style and eclecticism at its best. Look at all the decoration, all the tiles, the uh the gold in the decoration. So in St. Petersburg, you might remember from my previous tours, I say that it's all gold that glitters, and it's true. But apart from also expensive construction materials and decorations, they also used some state-of-the-art technologies at that time. So this is the photo. It's I think it's like 1970s, and in the Soviet times, of course, most of the time, also the small synagogue would be used for any kind of celebrations and services. On some really big events, the big synagogue would be open, but um, it was not easy, and it would be very rare occasion. And what kind of, state-of-the-art technologies would be available at that time? So obviously, you might have seen the lights, so the chandelier, and you must have noticed the big chandelier in the main building. So obviously, at the turn of the 20th century, well, yes, St. Petersburg had electricity, but of course there would not be electricity at the synagogue. It was in the Winter Palace. It was the illumination for the bridges, for the street lamps, but not for synagogues. But so they had candles, and well, all the candles in the chandeliers, they actually there was a very innovative ventilation system. All the carbon dioxide that was emitted by the candles would be gathered, filtered, and then the oxygen would be directed back to the synagogue building, to the holes. And I have no idea how they did that. Nowadays, of course, it's all electrified, it's all nice and warm, and it's just working as any other building. But back then it was something quite unusual. So basically, here what we're looking at is Arona Kodesh. So it's the place where the Torah scroll is kept, and you see here on the parochet this very special cover to the Arona Kodesh, and it shows here is depicted the temple in Jerusalem. The since it's very small, so the elevation, the bima is very close to Rana Kodesh. You see, Rana Kodesh is closed. So normally there should be more than one Torah scroll because something might happen to the Torah scroll, and then if it's corrupted, if it's damaged, then it's no longer sacred, it's no longer solid, and then it's no longer valid. And if there is not a Torah scroll, it's not really a synagogue, and it cannot function as a synagogue. Here in this hall, we see the original early 20th century furniture that is used in the Beit Midrash, in the well, in the school, in the shul. So uh, somebody asked me about the Jewish diaspora nowadays and Jewish community in St. Petersburg nowadays, and you see, so we are back to the big building. So the buildings are interconnected. So yeah, of course, there is a Jewish community, and it's pretty strong. I can't really say the numbers now. Yeah, there are schools, there are restaurants, there are, different events, and I'm just appalled, with the recent situation and the position of the Russian government and the support of, terrorism. But in general, the present Jewish presence in Russia is very strong, and it will, I think it'll always be judged. Well, just taking into account all the history of the 20th century, especially, and before. So this has been it, and probably this is the first time that I actually not overrunning. So we have some more time for questions, and I'll be very happy to answer them.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. You caught me off guard because you actually ended a little early. So I was like, oh, wait, hold on 1 second. I'm going to share a screen, which is going to show everybody where they can send a tip to Anna. And also, I'll give you, there's a little QR code if you put your phone right up to it, and it'll put a yellow link on your phone. You can tap that and do the same thing there. So yeah, it looks like we have a couple questions in the Q&A. And if you're comfortable just going to the questions and addressing them, that would be fine. Otherwise, I can share the questions with you, whichever you're more comfortable with, Anna.
I just might not see all of them, so let me.
You want to go to the Q&A?
Birabijan, yeah. So and Matting is asking me, yeah, I hear there's a place in Eastern Russia called Birabijan where the Jew lives or lived. Oh, Birabijan is actually not very, I would say, known thing, so I'm impressed. Yes, this was the attempt of basically Stalin and the Soviet regime to collect all the Jews from the country and send them to Birabijan, far from Moscow, far from the center of the city. It was sort of well, it was sort of an alternative to the Jewish state, and it kind of worked. So there is, like, the Jewish autonomous administrative area, um, but it's like in a larger scale, it actually failed. So the Stalin didn't really manage to, well, to send all the Jews, but he did manage to exterminate many in the labor camps, in prisons. Again, he had those trust issues, and if you supported Lenin, and Lenin never supported Stalin, so then Stalin had a problem, and there
Yeah.
were trust issues. So that's why many of those Jews would be labeled as public enemies.
Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna push you over to the Q&A and read off some of these. I'd expect
Thanks.
there is a much larger Jewish community in what was Ukraine today. Do you know anything about how they are doing, say, in Odessa?
Well, I don't really know about the anti-Semitism in, let's say, in Ukraine. I'm not sure in regards to the current situation, and but knowing that the president of Ukraine is actually Jewish, it kind of speaks a lot for it. Well, it speaks for itself. The Of course, in the Soviet times when the Second World War was there, the well, yes, just in general, the territories that used to be within the Russian Empire, especially well, Poland. Poland lost 3 million Jews in the Holocaust, and this was the former Russia, well, the former Russian territories. I mean, Russian Empire. The Jews who stayed in Ukraine, the Ukrainian Jews, it was, of course, many Jews perished in the Babi Yar, and well, the extermination of Jews in Ukraine was way more massive than on the Russian territories. This is true. So, with regards to the 20th century history, the Ukrainian Jews were in the far worse situation. This is true. But as of nowadays, as I say, I am not aware, but I believe that, well, having a Jewish president is a big deal.
I'm sorry, there was a follow-up to Birobidzhan, and the follow-up was,
Hmm.
did they live and pray freely or not? How did the people live out there in the middle of nowhere?
They were sent there on trains, and well, like it happened. It's not something, to me it sounds very much like, we're sending a bunch of trains and people to live in up north in Siberia and the Far East, to build new cities, to develop the new land. And it was the same idea. So yes, they lived in the middle of nowhere, but they went to build the new cities, to build the new life. That was the idea, and it was not something unusual for the Soviet state.
Mhm.
It was the because you can imagine how huge the country was, how vast the territories were, and yeah, it was very easy, to make people lost.
So this one visitor to St. Petersburg, who had the pleasure to go there in 2018, is asking about okay, so I'm just going to try to paraphrase this because it's a rather large, long question.
Hmm.
I was fortunate to see the inside of the synagogue, and it was stunning. The guide was saying that many Jews are not comfortable indicating they are Jewish for the census out of fear, and in that it would be used against them. Is this still the case? Is the anti-Semitism worse since October? We saw the news about what it was like for Jews from Israel who landed in Russia recently, and it looked just dreadful.
Uh, Anti-Semitism has woken up. Oh, this recent war, as I said, so I don't know, it's either Putin's regime just brings the worst in people, or like it's just something that people have always been like this and people were anti-Semitic. Hard to say, but it's true. So now, yes, we can definitely say that the anti-Semitism hasn't gone anywhere, and it's there. And what happened in Dagestan in the airport is also very much indicative of how the situation looks. Um, about the census, well, in the 2018, 2019, so those were already the years when the Russian opposition was pretty strong, yet not really centralized, and people in general were not very happy about it. So it wasn't only about the Jews. At that time, there was no really prosecution, but in general, people were no longer trusted, the authorities. And so it was just in general, they're not very happy about, information collected about them. That's at least my perspective, and that's what I remember, and that's what it was for me. As I
Mhm.
said, being married to a Jew, I don't remember like any situations when my husband would come across, some anti-Semitism, in everyday life.
Another question about with all the restrictions, how did the Jews get so wealthy and established during the years of the Pale?
So that's a good question. As I said, when there are rules, there are also a lot of exceptions and loopholes. And if you were very rich, obviously, you could be allowed to live outside of the Pale settlement because you will be bringing money. But for for Polyakov, for example, for Samuel Polyakov, for Lazar Polyakov is well, they're related, like a big Jewish family that was in charge of railroads and banking. Basically, they established one of the strongest bank systems in Europe at that time, and Russian economy was like, and Russian business was flourishing, you know, in the early 20th century. But then the First World War revolution killed it. But there was very like a decade of really important upheaval. They had to sponsor uh, many people, and they had to sponsor organizations to be allowed to establish their banks, to establish their offices, to build their headquarters in the capitals. And they had to be in charge of, um, some institutions, like their patrons, the big sponsors. And so money, money would give them way. And then so they had power, and they could also sponsor, and they could also help smaller businesses and their communities. That's why both Ginsburg, or the one who finally got the permission to build a synagogue, Horace Ginsburg and Polyakov, they did a lot of charity work. They established the schools, like for different like trade schools. They they sponsored village schools, and they also pale settlements, their communities also. Mostly the money would go to for education. And also Polyakov um, established a big trust that would be sponsoring the Aliyah to Palestine, and the further establishing of the Jewish state as well.
Mhm. I'm going to move you back to the synagogue in the presentation. Question came in, does the synagogue have a mikveh?
Um, I haven't seen the mikvah there. Maybe we were never really taken there. Normally there should be a mikvah. Yes, there should be a a spiritual purification bath. This is true. There should be a mikvah. So I assume there is a mikvah, but we've never been taken there. We've never been taken there. Never.
Some questions, not really questions, but comments about some other tours in terms of people being excited about the potential of you coming back with some different tours. So that's good to see.
Yeah.
And then there's a question about Russia, but you could speak to other regions as well. The question relates to Jewish schools. Are they popular in Russia?
Well, the Chabad community, which is very strong everywhere in the world, has private schools. It's true. There are different, uh, not within even Chabad community. Yes, there are private Jewish schools. This is true, and I think there are going to be even more because for two reasons. First of all, because the current Russian education system, they're basically rewriting history, and there is so much lies, about Russian history in the history books that now kids are taught with. So many people, those who can afford, they send their kids to private schools when there is less control of what is being actually taught to kids. And obviously, I'm sure there's going to be even more interest in private Jewish schools, which have always been there. It's true, but they were like much smaller, I would say. And now there will be more because of the anti-Semitism and the current position, of Putin with regards to this conflict.
How many working
Yeah.
synagogues are in St. Petersburg today? You know?
Well, this is still the main synagogue. There are two synagogues in Moscow. There's also like Grand Choral Synagogue in Moscow, but they remain the central ones. They're also small, like Chabad synagogues or other community synagogues, but they remain the same. They remain the original, the main ones, and uh, this is where most of the community, if they go, if they keep kosher, they keep Shabbat, they would go there for services.
I think we've addressed all the questions. There's a there's a thank you comment here. My great grandparents were born in Frampol, Ukraine around 1850. How far was that from St. Petersburg or Odessa? Their oldest son and his daughter were killed in the Proskorov pogrom in 1919. Fortunately, my great grandmother went to the Netherlands, which you are very familiar with right now, and then the US with younger children. Some went to Palestine. And then, of
Wow.
course, presentation was very helpful. Thank you. So, I mean, obviously, this touched their family in many ways. So I guess you can respond to the question in here. How far was St. Petersburg from Odessa? And yeah, I think to give them some idea there.
Yeah. So Odessa had a port. It was built as a port city, a town of Catherine the Great, by the way. And because of the port, it was actually pretty easy, not very long, to get to St. Petersburg. But if it's like on land, I can't really say exactly, but it could be a week's travel, if you travel, in the 19th century, definitely more than a week even. If it's trains, so then it's just maybe a day or 2 days, depending on like also if it's like early trains, they would take much longer. The further on, of course, it would develop. Um, it's interesting, to hear the story of, running from the pogroms and from Russian Empire, and after the revolution, and then rushing to the Netherlands. It's very interesting. So, you did. So your family. I'm not sure. Sorry, who left the comment. I don't know your name, but they managed to run from the Netherlands just really in time, because then with the Nazi occupation of Amsterdam and the Netherlands, there was nowhere to go. So it's just amazing that they managed to escape before that. Uh, it I'm studying now is and researching really a lot in the history of the Holocaust and Nazi occupation in Amsterdam, and its impact on the Jewish community, and then the numbers are absolutely astonishing. Before 1940, and this is when the Nazi occupation started on the 15th of May 1940, in the Netherlands, the 1/3 of the population was actually Jewish. It was like somewhat around 150,000 Jews that lived in the country, and more than half of that, like 85,000 in Amsterdam. And then after the Nazi regime, after the Second World War, uh, well, about 25% of all the Jewish population survived. This is
Mm,
how it's just absolutely astonishing.
mm,
And the Jewish quarter nowadays, it's like it's not really a Jewish quarter. It's not actually where Jewish community lives, but there is a beautiful synagogue. There is a Jewish history museum, but it does look like a ghost town.
yeah.
It
Um,
well,
one of the viewers was actually a part of a student group that worked to free the Jews that were put on trial. And in, I guess, in the early 70s, Jews were put on trial for things that were made up, like made up reasons or ways to imprison and put them on trial. And this person who's written in as anonymous was part of a
mhm.
student group and helped free them. And the question is, do the Russian history books disclose this history, or is this something that is not in the history books?
Well, I'm not sure what's written in the most recent history
Yeah.
books, but I didn't study this at school, but there are so many, TV programs, there are so many films about it. So it up until at least 2022, it was not really prohibited. There are like great researchers published, about that, and we know the numbers, we know the camps where Jews perished under Stalin. Like this is known, and but yes, the current regime, many people actually see Stalin and what he did with favor. They actually think that Stalin was a great leader and he did everything right. So I'm not sure. I don't know what to expect. I don't know, but it's something that I always knew, but I don't remember really studying this at school. Just in general, when I was so my school years is like 1995, 2005. We did not study that,
Mm-hmm.
but we did study the atrocities of Stalin in general.
Mm-hmm. The show
Yes.
trials, yeah.
Yeah, so we know of the trials.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, I guess I'll let you have some parting words because at this point we're at the end of the Q&A, and I think that you can wrap it up in some way that that brings it all together for us, and then we will see you soon, hopefully in the new year, and you will have a good holiday season with your family.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mara, for having me. Thank you, everyone, for joining this very specific tour. It's not just the beautiful hermitage or the history of the Romanovs and beautiful interiors. It's something pretty different. And given the context, of the situation, it's a rather sensitive subject. And thank you, Mara, for not uh, for still having it on the schedule and giving it a go. Thank you so much. And also, I would like to thank you for not being afraid of the backlash and connection, with Russian tours, because obviously our tours do not, uh, you know, they do not fence out Putin. We're not saying Russia is good. We're doing history here, right? We're talking about history,
That's
what we
important.
should be learning from. Exactly. So I really appreciate that. And in connection with this subject, as I said, I've always had this, interest and connection with Jewish history and Judaism. I'm not religious, and I wish I'm not Jewish. I'm not religious, but I like looking at it, from a historical point of view, from the historical perspective, and I see so many connections in Russia. Of course, there's so much impact of Russian Jews on the history of the modern state of Israel, and in general, the history of how Jewish diaspora would spread in the world as well. And basically, everywhere I go now, I know that there is some history that I know I can actually draw some parallels, and I can actually say, oh, this must have resulted into that. And it doesn't really matter in which part of the world I am at the moment. And in general, I've been studying, for my guide's license and to Israel. This has given me so much understanding in general, of world history even. And I don't mean to say that, you know, basically, Judaism and Jews, they kind of influence the world history. But you never know about the connections, like a butterfly effect. There might
Yeah.
be a pogrom somewhere far in Russia, but some 50 years later, all of a sudden a new country is born, you know, all these things.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I also think it is the more knowledge that you get, the more you understand how it's all connected.
Yes,
Yeah. So on
exactly.
that note, I'm going to say thank you, and thank you to everyone who attended tonight. I appreciate it. And please take a moment if you can to tip Anna the guide. And hopefully if you don't get that done tonight, you'll get that done tomorrow when you see that your email comes out. But thank you again. And we will let you know of our next virtual tours so that we can see you again soon. Have a great holiday
Thank
season.
you.
All right. Take
Thank you
care.
so much.
Bye-bye.
Happy